Hi, my name is Kevin Larrabee. I'm the head coach and owner here at Allied Strength in Gloucester, Massachusetts. I wanted to put together a short seminar for athletes, parents, and coaches on how athletes can effectively warm up to maximize performance and reduce the risk of injury. Before we get into all that, just a couple quick notes. First off, wherever you're watching this, there should be links for download of the PDF, so you can see all the slides, you can follow along as we go. There should be a download for the one sheet that we'll talk about in a little bit, so you can bring that with you to do all the warm-up stuff that we're going to talk about. And number 3, all the videos that we have in this talk, they're going to be available at alliedstrength.com, probably also where you're watching this, and they're going to be available on our YouTube channel as well. Finally, if you do have any questions or you need anything after this, never hesitate to email me, kevin@alliedstrength.com, and there's also a contact form at alliedstrength.com as well. And then I'm going to really emphasize this. We're going to be talking about maximizing performance, but also, again, reducing the risk of injuries. You're going to hear me emphasize that a lot because that is probably the number one priority with this talk, is we should do our best to help athletes avoid getting hurt. And we'll talk about why. So, goals for the seminar: take a quick look at the facts, what we know, effective warm-up strategies you can implement before practices and before games. Demonstrate movements and drills. This is a big one that can be done on the court, on the field, off ice with no to minimal equipment. So you don't have to be lugging a bunch of stuff around and you don't have to buy a bunch of equipment. This is stuff you can do right before practices, right before games. It'll take you about 15 minutes. And also, again, I'm going to emphasize this a lot, reduce the risk of injuries and maximize performance for athletes. All right, so reduce the risk of injury. Some athletes' careers are basically going to be middle school and high school. So we want to do whatever we can to maximize the quality of that career. And heck, maybe we're going to prepare them to compete at a college or even a pro level as well. We want to try to avoid lost practice and lost game time. There's only so many practices you're going to have in a season. If you're watching this as a coach, we want to make sure every player is participating in those practices so you can get ready for the upcoming games. And also, we don't want to miss game time. We also want to make sure that athletes aren't dealing with nagging injuries that carry along throughout the season. This is something that we can also try to avoid, and proper warm-ups will help that. And then we want to avoid the rehab process. The rehab process, when it comes to injuries that cause or need surgery, those can be really devastating on young and youth athletes, on student athletes, because the rehab process, well, it's not just the surgery, it's the process that they have to go through afterwards for months to get back on the field, to get back on the ice, or get back on the court. It can be very mentally taxing, and it can not only affect their sport, but it can also affect school and the rest of their life. Again, it's just very challenging, so we should do our best to try to avoid that at all costs. This is what we know. Athletes are sitting for 6 or more hours a day before practices and before games. They're going to school, right? They're sitting in class. But then they're also probably sitting afterwards. They might be doing some homework after school, or they might be getting on a bus to go to the game, or like I mentioned before, they might just go home, sit down, watch some TV, go on their phone or something like that. And we could be looking at like 8 or 10 hours of seated time before you're asking them to compete at a really high level. So we're asking them to really flip that switch quickly. And that's why the warm-up is so important for these athletes. Also, while they're sitting down on those glutes, those things that we use to stabilize our hips. Hip stability is very, very important for athletes, especially when it comes to change of direction. So we'll talk about this all in a little bit. I'm getting ahead of myself, I'm getting excited, but that's something we need to remember. Injury rates for youth athletes are on the rise. And this is something that I think is also worth mentioning, that as a parent, as a coach especially, try to really always have open discussions about nagging injuries. You always want it to be a positive discussion, because you never want kids to hide the fact that they're hurt, because those nagging injuries that I talked about before, those can lead to like movement dysfunction, and that can actually be the cause for even more serious injuries afterwards. So whenever these things pop up, we want to try to get at them as soon as possible so we can kind of get back on the healing path and not having those nagging injuries. So again, open discussion is always good. Studies show conclusively that dynamic warm-ups and activation drills minimize injuries and maximize performance. And this is really cool. There was actually a study that was done in 2016 where they started implementing a dynamic warm-up in gym classes, and they actually saw injury rates decrease like 60 to 80% across the board just for students, like not even athletes. But again, They're coming from the class, they're probably going in like third, fourth period, going to gym class, and then we're asking them to play very strenuous sports that they might not be familiar with, try to use skills that they don't necessarily have honed in. So that is something worth remembering. Again, I just thought that was really cool. We should have dynamic warm-ups in gym class. We used to just run a couple laps. I don't know if people are still doing that now. That was back when I was in high school. All right, so causes. Let's talk about some of the causes before we talk about the solutions. Early specialization. Athletes are playing one sport year-round. This is the big one. Injury rates are higher for athletes who specialize in one sport. Okay, so we're seeing athletes that are starting to specialize or just play one sport starting at age like 11, 12, or 13 years old, where they'll think they need to play a sport year-round. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But a really good example is baseball. So we're seeing boys at age 11, 12, 13, and then at 13 and 14, they're getting like Tommy John surgery. This is a surgery that used to be for pitchers in their 30s in the major leagues from, it's a repetition injury, right? When we have to get that Tommy John surgery. So it's really scary stuff. And I might be getting ahead of myself again, but we'll talk about this for this situation where we have athletes that could sometimes be specializing in one sport, then playing in multiple leagues. And for that example of a baseball player, they could be playing in one league on Saturday, one league on Sunday, and now they have pitch counts, right? So they're making sure that athletes are protected because they can only throw like 60 or 70 pitches in a game, and then they have to come out. But what if that athlete pitches in a game on Saturday in one league, then he has a game in another league the next day? They can kind of get around that. So we're seeing these injuries in younger athletes that are really repetition injuries. They're injuries that are caused from lack of recovery, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Again, getting a little ahead of myself. So again, not recovering after practices and after games, multiple games in a weekend. Another example is I had a female athlete who was 14. She would play like 4 hockey games in a weekend. Like that is, and that's like normal. That's normal for these tournaments, these leagues, and it's not just hockey, it's soccer, it's baseball, it's basketball, AAU basketball, and things like that. So these are things that we need to consider. We're not necessarily built to play in 4 or 5 games in a weekend and then be fresh for practice on Monday. And again, athletes feel pressure that they need to play in off-season leagues to be seen for college. A lot of times athletes can be sold these elite leagues. Like AAU was always a really good example when I was a kid, where we thought, we should be playing in AAU basketball leagues. That way we will get seen by scouts. And again, that was the example. I didn't even think about it back then, but we would go to tournaments on the weekend. You'd be playing 3 games in a day, 3 full time basketball games in a game in one day, and then you would come back the next day if you made it to the next round. So what happened to the off season? Something worth thinking about. And also, extra time outside of practicing games is being focused on skills and drills. So anytime that folks have outside of their normal practice and games for their sport and their league, they're also spending that time on skills practice. Like for hockey, they're going to shooting practice, or for baseball, they're hitting. For soccer, they're doing drills on a soccer field. They might be doing extra conditioning on their own. These are things that we need to watch out for. And of course, you could think I'm very biased, but again, with the research, what we've seen is that time is much better spent with strength and conditioning, improving their performance and resilience to the rigors of their sport. And then these are the last couple big ones. Recovery, talked about this a second ago, but lack of sleep, probably no surprise, but teenagers and student athletes are actually sleeping less than they did when I was in school, because they all have a phone, right? They have a phone, they have a computer, they have the blue light that's keeping them up at night, and they're just sleeping less. Kids are going towards energy drinks and caffeinated beverages more, and of course that is not a good supplement for a good night's sleep. Athletes that are 11, 12, they're in the middle school, high school age, they should be getting a minimum of 8 hours of sleep to be recovering for their sport. Also, poor nutrition. And this is like one of the simplest ones, but poor hydration as well. Because if an athlete is dehydrated, that's also going to take a toll on their tissue quality, like their muscles and their ligaments, if they're dehydrated. So we need to make sure that they are rehydrating and that they are also focusing on like really simple, good nutrition tactics, like making sure that they're having, some sort of protein at most meals of the day. Again, it would be perfect to have it at every meal of the day. It'd be great for them to have, eggs in the morning, have some like really good, lunch. School lunch is probably not tip top, but having some good protein at lunchtime and having a good snack before a practice and before games. But really, it can be as simple as just getting in some good calories. If they're traveling on a bus to go to a game, bringing something like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, like that's still good because it's going to give them a bunch of calories. It's going to allow them to fuel up. Unfortunately, it is still sometimes the case where, I would have a 3:30 group and I would have athletes that were coming in that hadn't eaten since lunch. So they'd go from like 12 to 3:30, then we would be performing at a really high level. Not really good. It's trying to like run your car at maximum speed in a drag race without any fuel. It doesn't make sense. So let's keep moving on. Let's talk about solutions. I love solutions. I don't like focusing on problems a lot, but it's good to just know that stuff so you can watch out for it. If you're watching this as an athlete, as a parent, or as a coach, just some things to watch out for. So solutions. We're going to talk about a 15-minute warm-up, 3-stage process to warm up, prepare our tissues for strenuous activity. And I will mention, again, in a perfect world, you would have access to foam rollers. You would have foam rollers with you at the practice field before the games. You throw them on the bus so we can help break down any poor tissue quality and warm up that tissue before we try to stretch it out. But again, not super realistic because if you have 20 people on your team, you might need either 10 or 20 foam rollers. So I'm trying to keep it realistic, trying to keep it practical. But in a perfect world, we'd have some foam rolling. So maybe we'll talk about that in a later time. So our 15 minutes is going to consist of 5 minutes of stretching, 5 minutes of activation, and then 5 minutes of mobility and an active warm-up. So this is our stretching series. But first, we need to dispel the myths. So a little bit of story time. And this is kind of my industry's fault, okay? So it was about 20 years ago now. There was a study that was done where the researchers had athletes stretch for like 2 to 5 minutes at a time, basically do a sit and reach test. So they tested a vertical jump once without stretching, and then once with 2 to 5 minutes of stretching afterwards. And what they saw was a 10% decrease in power output when they stretched before doing the vertical jump. And I mean, literally, they were stretching, then they had to do the vertical jump. So just stretching can be fatiguing. If you've ever stretched before, you ever do like yoga before, sometimes you're going to increase your heart rate. You're going to start sweating, right? So we misinterpreted that information as a strength and conditioning industry. And even if you want to take it at the extremes, one of my business partners, Mike Boyle, he puts it really well, where would you rather have your star athlete for the whole season at 90 or 95% injury-free? Or would you rather have that star player at this, mythical 100%, but he's going to get hurt 2 or 3 times during the season? So that's why we stretch. That's why we do some static stretching. We're going to go through 4 stretches, best bang for your buck. Everything that we talked about is all going to be time efficient. We never want to waste time. They can all be done in one spot. No equipment is needed. It's going to address all the lower body muscle groups. So I'm going to talk as we go through this stuff. And like I said, these videos are going to be on YouTube and on the website, so you don't have to necessarily jot down any notes right now. But we're going to hit on the hamstrings, the hip flexors, the hip rotators. We're also going to, once we get into the dynamic warm-up, we're basically going to get the adductors, our ankles. We're going to get the major muscle groups prepared for activity. So again, I really only need about 6 feet of circumference around me, and that's going to give me enough space to do all these different stretches. So we have 4 stretches on here, and I'm doing my best to show you, from the front and from the side so you can see the position, but I'm also going to give you coaching cues in the videos as well so you can follow along and coach them up. We would do everything for about 25 to 30 seconds on each side. So that's why we got 4 stretches for 5 minutes, because if we do 25, 30 seconds on each side, it takes some time to switch sides, and then it takes time to switch to the next exercise. Also, I will stress that if you're a coach and you're going around and you're having your athletes do this stuff, make sure you keep an eye on their faces, because a lot of times athletes will sleep through the stretch series and stretching in general because, one, it's uncomfortable, right? They don't want to be put in an uncomfortable position. And then two, they might be more interested in just like talking with their friends and catching up, or like looking at their phone or something like that. So make sure when they get in the position, and we'll kind of go through this one more time. I'm going to pull this back so we can go through one more time. So they should kind of have a face like, oh yeah, I'm stretching now. I'm stretching. I'm manipulating that tissue. I am stretching out that tissue, all right? So that's what you want to keep an eye out for. Next up is activation. Let's talk about glute activation. This is probably the most important one. We talked about sitting on our butts for 6, 8, 10 hours before asking our athletes to compete at a high level. We need to wake those glutes back up because we're not using them sitting down, obviously. So why do we need to do that? Hip stability, balance, preventing knee injuries. Those are the big ones. Also, preventing low back injuries too. Again, the hips are very much the driver of the body. Wherever your hips go, your body is going to go, right? So it's important to be stable at the hips, so whenever we need to change direction, we're structurally sound. So we're going to activate those glutes with hip lifts, single leg holds, band walks, bodyweight lunges, and squats, and we'll go through that in a second. And then core and shoulders. So basically what I'm doing is I'm splitting that body in half, where right above your hips up, and then from your hips down into two sections. So we're talking about core and shoulders. And also I want to hit on this for a second, because we're not just warming up for non-contact injuries, we're also warming up for contact injuries. And this is again why like a strength and conditioning program is really big, because if an athlete is bigger, stronger, faster, more structurally sound, that's going to be to their advantage. If they're running for a loose ball and they collide with someone, they're not going to get injured in that collision. They're not going to have like my low back is bugging me now after that collision, or my knee buckled and now my knee's bugging me from that collision. We'll get into that in a little bit, I think. So again, core and shoulders, balance, torso stability. If you want to think of that as core stability, preventing low back discomfort and shoulder injuries. So again, those collisions can cause shoulder injuries as well. People, bang shoulders can cause shoulder injuries. And we're going to activate the core and the shoulders with crawling patterns and front planks and bird dogs. Crawling patterns are probably the best thing that you can do. Crawling patterns are going to be great because not only are you getting shoulder stability, you're getting hip stability, you're getting core stability, and we'll talk about that in a second. So this is our two-leg hip lift. And before I start the video, really important that you have your heels down and toes pointed up towards the ceiling. That active dorsiflexion, we call it dorsiflexion when those toes are pointing back towards your knees, that's going to allow for better glute recruitment. So keep that in mind. And then when we go into that hip lift, you're going to see I have a 90-degree bend in that knee, looking for straight lines. That's what we're always trying to do. We never want a strong body is never a bunch of curves, right? We're not like hunched over. We're nice. We have good posture. We have a 90-degree bend in our knee. We're in that athletic position, whatever it might be. And we have straight lines. So this is a progression. This is a single leg hip lift. So we're actually going to watch this video twice so we can talk about it a little bit. But let's see if we can get back and then go forward again. This two-leg hip lift, that's where you can stay forever. You never need to progress from that two-leg hip lift. This is going to allow for glute activation. And when we do these, we're going to do 3 10-second holds, or you can also do 5 reps with 3-second holds, like kind of going up and down and doing a couple repetitions to get that hip extension action going. But you can stay at that two-leg version. I'll go back to it one more time. These are very quick videos. We can stay at that two-leg version forever. No one ever needs to progress to that single-leg version. You can give it a shot, but if they go to that single-leg version and they don't have those straight lines that we talked about, or their low back's kicking in, or their hamstrings cramping up, immediately go back to the two-leg version. It's going to be just as good. All right, so again, straight lines. A lot of times when you see people go to that single-leg version, you'll see those hips come down a little bit. They don't have full hip extension, so we're going to keep an eye out for that. All right, so mini bands. Mini bands are awesome. Mini bands are probably one of the best things that you can buy. It's the only piece of equipment I'm going to recommend you pick up for this warm-up series. I'm actually going to grab a couple. So I'm going to talk with you as I go off camera and grab some of these mini bands because it's that important. But these mini bands, you can get them at performbetter.com. They come in multi-packs. So if you're an athlete and you just want to get a bunch for yourself, or if you're a coach, they're actually sold in multi-packs as well. So we have the yellow, which is the lightest resistance, green, which you probably even couldn't see on that video because I'm on my turf and it's kind of blending in with that. And then blue. So it is kind of like a light, medium, and heavy resistance on these bands. And they're fantastic for these drills for glute activation. But I'm placing that green band right at the arch of my foot, and I'm getting an athletic position, so knees slightly bent, weight shifted back on my heels. Again, I'm going to digress for a second because it's really important to talk about this. But if you are watching your athletes, whether it's in this or doing any kind of like glute activation stuff, you always want to watch out for like a forward weight shift if their weight shifted on the front of their foot. Again, this can usually be a sign of unstable hips. We'll probably come back to that in a little bit too. But I want to show you these mini bands. I would only go to performbetter.com. You can get cheap, like really bad ones at Amazon. They're going to break. Go to performbetter.com. They're in Rhode Island, so if you're in New England, you'll get them like the next day. Great people, great service. But this mini band walk, I'm actually going to do 10 steps in one direction, 10 steps back to the other direction, staying in that athletic position. Knees slightly bent, weight shift the back of my heels. You try these out, what are you going to feel? And this is good. This is really good for athletes too, is they get the immediate feedback of like, oh, my glutes are turning on. That's what it's like for my glutes to do work. Okay, I understand that now. So the mini band walk is great. And then we have our band resisted bodyweight squat. So this, we're placing the band right at the, right below the knees. And this is such a good exercise. This is such a good exercise because, I wish I could almost pause these videos. I probably could some way, but I'm not gonna risk it. I'm gonna keep talking to you guys. But when you see athletes do a bodyweight squat, like middle school, high school athletes, youth athletes, a lot of times when they squat, you'll see their knees cave in. Same thing when they jump up. When that happens, it is a clear sign that they're not stable at their hip. Their glutes are either not firing or they're not strong enough. This happens even more so with really tall athletes, athletes with really long legs. So that is why this is so great. Because with this band, we can actually force them into the error, so they have to course correct. And then we can also coach them to keep their weight shifted back on their heels. So we're not only working on a squat pattern, we're getting glute activation, we're also getting some ankle mobility, and we're teaching them how to properly load their feet for when they want to use their lower body. So that is a fantastic drill. Again, we do like 10 squats, knock out 10 squats. Again, this is all in that one sheet that I mentioned previously. And we're also, if we go with arms overhead, we can get a little bit of thoracic mobility, a little bit of upper body mobility as well. All right, so now we're gonna really start moving. So mobility and active warm-up, that was, again, just to go back, that was our activation. We did stretching, activation, now mobility, active warm-up. Make sure you hit the major muscle groups, quads, glutes, hamstrings, adductors, abductors, pecs, back, shoulder stabilizers, and don't forget the feet and the ankles. We'll get to that in a second. Work through multiple patterns and planes. Prepare the tissue to perform. Active warm-up drills should be done for about 8 to 10 yards. So you'll see in these videos, I kind of went the narrow way of my turf, but set up 2 cones, like walk 10 strides and set up 2 cones, and then just have athletes, don't do reps, just actually go from cone to cone. Also, I will, just from years of experience, coach your athletes. If you're a coach watching this and you're going to do these on the field, coach them to go through the cone, because otherwise they'll stop like 3 feet from the cone and they're not going to want to actually do all the reps, okay? Just a pro tip. All right, so first is our ankle mobility. I'm doing them here up against the wall, but you don't even need a wall. Like I can do them right here. The goal here is to just make sure that that foot stays flat on the ground and that we're driving our knee right over the middle of the foot, and we're relaxing the back leg. So we're going to watch that again. So relaxing that back leg. When people do this, a common mistake is they're actually trying to stretch that back calf, but we don't want to do that. It's just there for stability. And then the cool thing about using a wall is that you actually have a goal to shoot for. So you can be driving your knee right over the middle of your toe, and if you can hit the wall, you back your foot up a little bit. I actually show you kind of right here. You'll see I actually back my foot up a little bit because I can tap the wall. I'm going to back my foot up a little bit, and then I'm going to try to tap the wall. So we're rocking back and forth. We're moving through that range. It's not pushing really hard and holding. It's actually just kind of rocking back and forth. We're trying to work through that movement pattern as we do our ankle mobility drills. And again, you can do it on the bleachers, you can just do it without anything. You can kind of just rock back and forth. Again, this is really important because for athletes that play sports with high tops, or in hockey where they're going to be putting their feet into skates, they basically have no ankle mobility. So that is important to work on. So this is our bear crawl. Opposite arm, opposite leg. And then our goal is to just maintain a stable torso position. And again, this is shoulder stability stuff. This is getting those shoulder stabilizers warmed up. And we want to try to keep our torso parallel to the ground. So we'll watch that one more time. And again, we got coaching cues for all this stuff. This will be really hard for athletes to pick up initially because they're going to want to do same arm, same leg. It's the same thing when it goes to any kind of skipping patterns or sprinting patterns. When they get set up, they kind of have to stop and allow their brain to kind of rewire and think all right, opposite arm, opposite leg, opposite arm, opposite leg. So next is our quad pullback or butt kick pullback. You might have done these before. This is, again, I want to give you some really good coaching cues for this though, because athletes will do whatever they can to either not stretch or they'll mess it up. So with this, we're going to make sure that when we pull that heel to our butt, our knees are going to come together because they'll kind of pull themselves into hip external rotation, or they'll just not get a quad stretch. They'll be pulling their leg out to the side. And also, if they feel like they have already really good quad flexibility, they're going to come back around on the opposite side. And instead of actually stretching their quads and mobilizing their quads, they're actually pulling themselves into hip external rotation. That's not what we want. That's not the goal of this drill. Our inchworm. And again, what's great about all this stuff is, put this into context. We did some stretching, we did some glute activation. So if we're thinking about our heart rate, we're at a resting heart rate while we're stretching, maybe a little bit higher. The activation stuff, we're doing a little bit more work, we're increasing that heart rate a little bit more and warming up that tissue even more. And then once we start getting to this stuff, you're gonna see athletes they're going to start breathing a little bit. This is going to get their heart rate jacked up. These are not easy to do. These are not easy to do if you do them right. So inchworms, we're going to keep those arms and legs straight, walking our feet as close to our hands as we can, and then walk our hands back out. Again, bang for your buck, right? So we're getting shoulder stability, we're getting hamstring mobility, and we're getting core stability as well as they do this. Leg cradle for our hip rotators. So again, this is something that athletes can tend to do incorrectly a lot, where they'll actually pull just at the front of their leg, and again, they're pulling themselves into hip external rotation, where we actually want to make sure that we're stretching the hip external rotators. So that's really two different things. Pulling yourself into hip external rotation and stretching your hip external rotators. So again, we're going to give really clear and concise coaching cues on this stuff. We want to make sure that same side hand is coming under that same side leg. Opposite hand is going at the ankle, and we're just going to pull up and across at the body, kind of at a diagonal when we do this, okay? This is our reverse single leg deadlift. So here we're getting, hip stability. We're getting some upper body mobility as well. We're just getting those glutes to fire. We're warming up those hamstrings. We're actually loading up those hamstrings, and we're going to load them up again before we're done. Again, really good movement. And athletes are probably going to be really unbalanced when they do this. That's okay. The goal is that they continue to try to focus on the movement and not just rush through it. Just have them take their time, remind them that it's okay to be unbalanced. They're supposed to be unbalanced, because especially for the less athletic athletes, you never want them to feel like, oh man, I can't do this stuff. I'm just going to rush through it because I don't want anyone to see me. Try not to ever let that happen. Just again, do your best, guys. Take your time. Keep a slight bend in your knee. Bring your back leg straight. Reach straight ahead. Fall back into your trailing leg and switch sides. So we're getting that hip hinge pattern there. All right. High knee skip, high knee run. This is where we're really picking it up. Now we're actually getting that heart rate going. You got our high knee skip, going through that twice. Then we got our high knee run. There's two basically types of skips. There's kind of like that, which is more of a track skip where you got a little bit more of a bounce. There's also a power skip. You can do either one. Either one is fine. Some athletes are going to be taught from one coach one way, and they're going to almost not be able to retranslate it back to a different way. But as long as they're getting that opposite arm, opposite leg action, and they're not going, same side, arm and leg at the same time, they're going to be good to go. So again, we're really moving now. Straight leg walk, straight leg skip. So this is a brilliant drill. I did not create it, but it is fantastic because not only are we getting hamstring mobility, and I'm going to play this one more time because again, really quick videos on the narrow part of the turf. We're getting hamstring mobility and then we're getting activation on the pull back down. Okay, so this is where I also want to talk about a lot of that glute activation stuff we were talking about before. It is not just for reducing the risk of knee injuries. It's also reminding, I should say it's a reminder that those glutes are one of the big brakes that we have for our lower body. Like the glutes along with the hamstrings are what is going to decelerate us when we need to quickly slow down and then change direction. The quads are of course going to do some as well, but those are the two main brakes that we have for the lower body. So activating those are really important. Athletes that have weak hamstrings or weak glutes not only are at higher risk of injuring their knees, but also pulling their hamstrings. So if you have the athlete or that is like always pulling their hamstring, like they're always coming up, pulling their hamstring, this is going to be huge for them. Getting those hamstrings stronger, getting those glutes stronger, or maybe just waking them back up before we're asking them to compete at a high level. All right, so again, staying nice and tall. Another thing we want to watch out for is, the forward lean, like athletes trying to almost like kick themselves in the face. Always coach them to stay nice and tall. Just bring your leg up as high as your mobility allows. That's all you got to do. And then karaoke. You've probably done this a million times, but it's really good. Turn your hips. It's good for warming up our lower body. The reason why I want to put it in here as well, though, is also making sure that we keep our shoulders pointing straight ahead, because you'll see, athletes kind of like turn, like almost like they're doing a complete, going 180 degrees from side to side. We don't really need that. All right, so wrapping up. I know this is probably a little bit longer than I said it was going to be, but I want to be thorough. I want to give you guys a lot of awesome, actionable stuff to take home. All right, so we got to be making sure that we're recognizing fatigue. We talked about dehydration before, but a couple other things we need to keep in mind. Many non-contact injuries can be attributed to athlete fatigue. These are the signs. Having issues catching breath, wobbly legs, problems with concentration, poor attitude, and frustration. All right, so these are things that you want to watch out for when the athletes they're actually have that wobbly leg thing going. That's like a red alert. That is an absolute red alert. So this is why it always, in hindsight, when my coaches used to have us for football practice, they just run us. They just keep running us until someone, fell down on the ground. And in hindsight, that's really bad, because if their legs are really fatigued, they're putting themselves in a much higher risk of getting injured, both hips, knees, ankles, okay? So we want to keep an eye out for that. Also, problems with concentration. This can also be a sign of dehydration, but if you're giving instructions of what to do during a timeout or something like that, or for a practice drill, and they're not able to kind of pay attention, that could be a sign that they're either dehydrated or just really wiped out. And again, just something to watch out for. Poor attitude and frustration. We see this a lot with a missed defensive assignment. Athletes will kind of freak out because they're just tired. They're working their butts off. They miss a defensive assignment, and then they kind of act out in frustration. And of course, having issues catching their breath more than normal. But here again, talking about the statistics, the majority of the injuries that occur during practices and before and during games actually happens in the last 25%. So it's in the fourth quarter or the fourth quarter equivalent of whatever sport you play. Even more so when things go into overtime, because athletes are in a fatigued state. They are now giving their body instructions that their body is not in the same regular condition to do so. Things that they expect their body to be able to do when they're fresh, not so much when they're in the 60th minute of a game and they're sweating and they might be a little bit dehydrated and maybe they hadn't eaten anything since lunch. That is putting themselves in a really bad position. So we want to keep an eye out for that. Again, just keep these statistics in mind. Again, lots of really great research. There's actually, I think it was Leahy Clinic, has a really good, just front page of awesome, just research reviews on all this stuff. If you want any of it, Kevin@alliedstrength.com, I can send it all to you. It's really cool stuff. So just to wrap up, prioritizing 15-minute warm-ups before practices and before games, really important stuff. Budget in that 15 minutes, no matter what. I would put it this way, even if athletes show up late, make sure they warm up. A couple laps is not a really good warm up. If you're an athlete, make sure if you need to, get to the field 15 minutes early. If this isn't kind of like what your warm up looks like, make sure you're properly warming up, okay? Prepare your athletes for performance while reducing the risk of injury. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. So again, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch all this. I know it's probably a little bit longer. It looks like it was probably 40 minutes or something. But this is really important stuff. It's really important for student athletes because, again, this might be their whole career. It might be middle school and high school. Let's make sure they can have the best career possible. Let's make sure they don't have to go and get surgeries or go through a rehab process or miss practices, miss big games, or have nagging injuries throughout the year. And not only, or just aside from the injury reduction thing, let's make sure that they perform at their highest possible level. That's, again, 15 minutes can be absolutely gigantic to make sure athletes stay prepared for practices and for games. Again, AlliedStrength.com. You can get the videos on the one sheet. It's going to be on the blog. So if you go to the top of the website, there'll be a thing called blog. And I'll probably link to it in our sports performance page as well. And then you can get all the videos, the one sheet, Kevin at AlliedStrength.com. I mentioned a couple times before. You can also, I post a bunch of videos on Instagram in terms of exercises, drills, and stuff like that. Not only for athletes, but general population at, I think it's Allied_strength. I'm sure I'm putting a link up right now where you can watch those on there. And again, I just want to really thank you for your time. And if you're interested, if you're thinking about sports performance training and you're in the Cape Ann area, come on down. Come on down to Allied Strength in Gloucester. That's what we're here for. We're here to help out local coaches and local athletes, parents with general population training, just helping people be the best they can possibly be in an incredible environment. I think if you come down and check out Allied Strength, you'll notice that immediately. Not so much when it's quiet in here, but when the music's going and everyone's here, it's a blast. So again, thank you so much. If you need anything, email me. Please reach out. And again, hopefully this was very helpful for you. Implement it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.